Hello, my name is Ahmad Harb. I am the Director of Research and Analysis at Arab Center, Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us in this webinar titled The Looming Israel-Hezbollah War, Prospects, Deterrence, and Impacts. We will be discussing developments on the Lebanese-Israeli border, where daily skirmishes between Hezbollah and Israel since October of 2023 have caused death and destruction on both sides of the border. These developments are the subject of serious discussions and diplomatic negotiations to prevent these skirmishes from developing into an all-out war that could very well be the harbinger of a regional conflagration. Needless to say, they occur as Israel's war on Gaza enters its 10th month, causing over 38,000 Palestinian deaths, according to local health authorities in Gaza, but some 186,000 deaths, according to a study published by the prestigious medical journal The Lancet just a few days ago. Both Hezbollah and Israel have said that they would like to avoid an all-out war, but the daily skirmishes make such a war quite possible. Threats and counter-threats abound, with Israeli leaders announcing the deployment of yet more troops to the border and vowing to return Lebanon to the Stone Age. On the other hand, Hezbollah's leaders promised to reach every worthy target in Israel and declare on occasions that Israel does not fully know the kinds of weapons the party possesses and is ready to use in the war. Already, Israeli attacks have killed some 100 Lebanese civilians and more than 300 of Hezbollah's cadres, and destroyed many Lebanese border villages and displaced almost 100,000 people. Hezbollah's attacks have killed about 10 Israeli civilians and 20 soldiers, and resulted in the abandonment of Israeli border towns by tens of thousands of Israelis who have moved to other areas of the country. With the Israeli war on Gaza not showing much progress in the way of a ceasefire, negotiations are ongoing, supposedly, but Israeli leaders insist on eradicating Hamas's political and military capabilities. It is hard to see how Israel's leaders can think of starting another war with Hezbollah. On the opposite side, Hezbollah has pledged to be loyal to the principle of the unity of the fronts of resistance forces and vows that it will end its attacks when a sustainable ceasefire is reached in Gaza. But if anything, the last 9 months have shown that both sides are primed for a confrontation. The United States, the United Nations, France, and other parties continue with their diplomatic efforts, which have not yet produced the conditions necessary for a sustainable cessation of hostilities. As we know, Lebanon has been in the grip of economic problems since 2019, and its economy is barely functioning. In addition, it is hosting some 1.5 million Syrian refugees who are a huge social and economic burden and whose situation requires a comprehensive solution that deals with them and with millions of others in Turkey, Jordan, Iraq, and elsewhere. In short, Lebanon cannot afford to be in a war with Israel and cannot sustain any widespread confrontation between Hezbollah and Israel. Then there is the Arab regional environment and what Arab countries would like to happen or not to happen. Hezbollah also has regional connections and friends who might decide to enter a war on its side. In fact, such participation in actions against Israel in the United States has indeed taken place on the hands of Iran, the Houthis in Yemen, and Shia militias in Iraq. Indeed, the potential of them entering the fray leaves open the distinct possibility of an all-out war in the region. Then there are Israel's own considerations, a war in Gaza, an apparent rift between political and military leaders on the war in Gaza, economic losses in the war, and international ostracism because of war conduct and other things. Inside Lebanon, the degree of support or opposition to the possibility of Hezbollah's war with Israel is a major consideration for the party and the country's government. Overall, at any rate, there is a palpable feeling that such a war is generally not welcome by anyone. A conflagration is most assuredly pouring oil on the fire since Lebanon suffers from economic near collapse and has not been able to elect a new president since October of 2022. Importantly, there are sectarian undertones to the issue, with general and overwhelming opposition in non-Shia communities and split support or opposition among the Shia themselves, depending on how far from or close to Hezbollah partisans are. Finally, there is the American factor. The United States is Israel's main supporter, but it is also not quite interested in a war between Hezbollah and Israel. Reasons vary between Washington not believing that Israel should start a war with Hezbollah and actually wishing that the war on Gaza would end. Washington fearing that a war would, fearing what a war would do to Lebanon. The administration, the Biden administration, thinking about the upcoming elections, as well as many other considerations. Arab Center Washington, D.C. today has convened a panel of experts to discuss the escalation on the Israel-Lebanon border and the potential for an all-out war. Our panelists will try to address the different aspects of this potential and explore ongoing efforts for negotiations, deterrence, and prospects, as well as the political, humanitarian, and regional implications of further escalation. Patricia Karam is a non-resident fellow with Arab Center Washington, D.C. She will discuss the general political atmosphere in Lebanon today in support of or opposition to a war with Israel. She will also discuss the general economic situation in Lebanon in the shadow of a looming war with Israel. Joseph Bahout is Associate Professor of Practice and Director of the Issam Fares Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs at the American University of Beirut. He will discuss where Hezbollah and Iran's allies stand on this issue. Rala Al-Husseini is Associate Professor in Political Science at Lund University. She will address the sectarian undertones surrounding the issue in Lebanon. And finally, Paul Salem is Vice President for International Engagement at the Middle East Institute. He will inform us about the American position and what Washington would or would not like to happen between Israel and Hezbollah. As for format, each panelist will offer a short introduction of about 5 minutes on the topic they have agreed to cover. They will speak in the order in which I already identified them. Patricia, Joe, Rala, and then Paul. After finishing their remarks, I will engage with each of them with some questions. We will then ask the audience questions to the panelists. Please submit your questions on the Q&A feature on your Zoom page or send them to events@arabcenterdc.org, events@arabcenterdc.org. Please identify yourself and state the question as briefly as possible. We will try to get as many of these questions as possible before the end of the webinar. Patricia, your turn.
Thank you, Ahmad, and thank you, Arab Center, for inviting me. I will start my introductory remarks just focused on sort of the question that you posed, that you asked me, the issue of level of domestic political support for Hezbollah. The rest could be subject to follow-up questions, just not to take up too much initial time. But I'll start by saying that the Palestinian question, just very quickly, and Hezbollah's connection to it really in itself sort of triggers mixed sort of reactions in Lebanon, which come from fissures in society that have to do with the role of the Palestinians in Lebanon, their presence, and the civil war. So, and Hezbollah has really defined itself as the guardian of Lebanon, Israel's enemy, an advocate of Palestinian statehood. And when they were able to push out Israel in 2000 from the south, and when they were able to survive the 2006 war, they really transformed themselves into more than just supporters of the Shia. I should say the disenfranchised Shia. They transformed themselves into a national force. And today, really, Hezbollah draws its legitimacy from resistance operations at the border, even though a good portion of the Lebanese are not supportive and consider it to be an Iranian proxy as opposed to a resistance movement. I say that just to say that the level of domestic political support for Hezbollah in Lebanon, in the case of war with Israel, is complex and multifaceted. Hezbollah enjoys support among certain segments of the population, especially its base within the Shia community, who really view it as a provider of social service, welfare that the state doesn't provide, but also among others who consider Hezbollah to be standing up to Israeli aggression. And since October 7, the resistance narrative that has legitimized Hezbollah has had a boost with even a number of non-Shia groups and voices joining the fray. So the issue is big. The public is essentially split into three camps. Those on the one hand who are willing to suffer, who will be willing to suffer damages for Hezbollah. Those on the other end who are vocal against Hezbollah and would consider that this is a demonstration of why they are against it, or they have been against it. But both of these camps are not the majority. The third camp really represents those who will be responsive to a number of factors. How Hezbollah fares in the war, and more importantly, what promises Hezbollah makes about damages that take place in the case of war. So for example, for reference, in 2006, Hezbollah really consolidated in some way its relationship with the Shia Lebanese by providing immediate and generous sort of compensation for damages incurred, and were very supportive to those who lost breadwinners, who were put on stipends that probably are in existence until now. They're said, I mean, what I saw is they're said to have spent some 300 million on reconstruction and compensation at the time. So the elements in question here are interests at stake, and also the narrative dominance and the presentation of how the war is. In the narrative so far, while there has been quite a bit of Hezbollah being elevated, and I'm sure some of my fellow panelists can opine on some of this, Israel is also being put down. And so while you still have those who say, why the hell are we dragged into war? More and more, the answer to this is because of Israel's excessive discourse. So this is kind of translating into Israel would have come for us anyway, so we're glad that Hezbollah is able to defend us. And there are Israelis, arguably few or marginal Israelis, who've been talking also about colonizing South Lebanon and have made themselves, and this is important because they've made themselves heard, which matters because this will bolster Hezbollah's assertion that, you see, they're not only attacking because they want to get rid of us, they want the land as well. So Hezbollah remains the defender of the land. In other words, so in addition to these narrative elements that lift up Hezbollah, there's been the use of elements that demonize Israel. And these ultimately would have the effect of weakening the accusation by some of, look where Hezbollah has dragged us, and allows them to dominate the narrative and say, well, Israel is not being successful in Gaza, so it needs to attack us to give its public the appearance of a victory, which is why it will attack us regardless. Now, the question is how well they deploy the narrative is still unclear. What is clear, though, is that Hezbollah's involvement in a war with Israel would likely polarize Lebanese society further, given the deep divisions within society and politics over Hezbollah's role, with, as I mentioned, some factions strongly opposing its hegemony, its armed presence, its alignment with Iran. This means that despite its base of support and its popularity, or I should say growing, in my opinion, popularity, it could also face challenges in a prolonged conflict scenario. On the other hand, its position is just simply likely to be strengthened in the event of conflict through the increased support that I mentioned with the deployment of these self-serving narratives. But ultimately, if undefeated by war, Hezbollah will declare victory and then demand payback for the losses from all those who didn't support it, which will in itself be very dangerous for Lebanon, which would have also suffered from war. So I'll stop here. Ahmad.
Thank you, Patricia. Great. Very Very good timing. Joe, your turn.
Yes, thank you, Imad. Actually, you assigned me. Thank you first for inviting me and for inviting us. It's very joyful to be with good friends here. You assigned to me a question. I'm not sure that I will completely stick to it because, frankly, I don't know if how much will Iran and its proxies enter the fray in case of a war with Lebanon, but let me throw some considerations here, some parameters. First of all, I mean, partly the answer to this question has to do with why did Hezbollah enter the battle indirectly on October 8th. So the same reasons that saw Hezbollah entering the battle of Gaza indirectly and at a low level or mid level will probably also trigger the participation of the rest of the what we call the axis of resistance. I mean, logically, this should be the same. Now, the question is how much? I mean, who will enter and where? And here you play on a whole range of theaters: Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Iran directly, other places, etc. So will it be one of them, two of them, three of them, all of them? Second, the level of engagement of Iran, potentially directly, like when Iran came to grip with Israel for a night, if you remember. And then what will be the consequences? Are we heading towards Armageddon in the region, as some people are floating it? Or will it remain a sort of choreographed escalation that will maybe at one point, on the contrary and paradoxically, engage a very forceful and strong American involvement in order to stop all this. This leads me to the second element of the answer. What is almost certain, and you said it, and I think Patricia said it, neither Iran nor the US want to see this scenario, and this is part of the deterrent factors that, for me, are today barring a full-fledged war between Lebanon and Israel, or Hezbollah and Israel. I think that, and Paul can confirm, but very, very strongly, certain voices in the US, even in the military at the very high level, the national security advisors and other, plainly said, we cannot promise Israel that we can defend it up to the level where we should defend it in case of a full-fledged war in the region. That would be triggered by an operation over Lebanon. So I think this chain of rationale is by itself the deterrent. And of course, if Iran triggers its proxies in the region, I think it will be a way to probably deter Israel from engaging in a very wide, let's say, large-scale war in Lebanon. So I don't bar let's say, the escalation in Lebanon. Let's say a sort of controlled deterrence escalation, but I bar for sure a full-fledged war between Hezbollah and Iran. Here I would add three certain elements for, I mean, on top of what Patricia has already said. There's something very interesting in Lebanon after October 8th and in the Arab region, which is a change, a twist in mood of the Sunni communities in the region. For the first time, maybe since 2 or 3, Sunnism in the region, in the Levant, all over, not only in Lebanon, is starting to end a sort of period of mourning, political mourning, and a sort of apathy politically. I think that the Gaza war has rejuvenated a little bit the community, and strangely, it has put it closer to Hezbollah and to the forces of resistance. You can, I mean, without getting into very granular examples, but take only, for example, the Mufti of the Republic in Lebanon and his latest preach last, I think, 2 weeks ago, where it was very radical, anti-Israeli, very radical pro-Gaza, and etc. You have the Jama'ah Islamiyah, who are now fighting at the side of Hezbollah in the south. You have MPs from the 14th of March who were extremely anti-Hezbollah after Hariri's assassination and the 2008, and etc., who are now putting portraits of Hassan Nasrallah in their living rooms and on TV. So you have a twist of mood. By the way, we at IFI are publishing next week a paper on that, on how the Gaza war is changing the mood of the Sunni community. So this is, I think, a factor that should be factored in any escalation between Israel and Lebanon. Second, I think that for Iran, the rationale behind, if Iran was behind partly October 7, the rationale was to show that the unity of front, the unity of resistance, etc., Muaskar al-Mumana'a, all this is not a theory, it's a practice, it's something that is real. Now, I know that this triggers a lot of irony and smiles and skepticism. Some people wanting to use that to challenge Hezbollah to say, why don't you attack Israel and etc. I think it's much more subtle than that. I think Iran is showing exactly what is the use and what is the subtlety of this unity of front by playing on several levels of engagement. The Houthis do their part, the Hashd al-Sha'bi do its part. In Syria, someone is doing its part, not the regime, interestingly, but this is another discussion, and others also. So I think that for Iran, if there is an advantage or if there is a gain that is expected from this entire war in Gaza, it's two things. First of all, to emerge as the main player for any solution, and so far it is emerging. The indirect dialogue between the US and Iran is showing that Iran will be probably one of the main actors of any solution, and this is a net gain for Iran, whatever the losses on the ground are. And second, and here I completely agree with Patricia, on the Lebanese level, Hezbollah is emerging as the sole interlocutor. You know, Hochstein is coming to Lebanon and to Israel. He talks to Hezbollah, even not indirectly. I mean, more than let's say very, very, very closely to Hezbollah. Le Drian does the same. The German intelligence has spent a week in Beirut in meetings with Naim Qasim and Mohammed Raad. This is unprecedented. For Hezbollah already, this is a gain. And I think that the culmination of that gain would be after the war of Gaza. Of course, if hell doesn't break out completely, Hezbollah will emerge as the political actor able to impose a political solution in Lebanon, including the presidency of the Republic. So for them, these are the gains. The people who are dying in the south or elsewhere, the very heavy losses that Hezbollah is taking, and they are heavy and painful, are, I think, calculated within this global potential gain, and this is the rationale under which we should understand things. Now, of course, I can expand on why also Israel has not yet decided to go there, but this is not what I was assigned. I'll probably weigh in on that in the discussion.
Thank you, Joe. Rola.
All right. Thank you very much. Good morning. I would like to start by thanking the Arab Center and Ahmad Harb for inviting me to join this august panel. My remarks will overlap with and build on many of the ideas expressed by my colleagues. So let me start by saying there's no consensus among the Lebanese when it comes to Hezbollah. And therefore, there's no agreement on potential involvement in a war with Israel. The communities are divided, I would argue, vertically when it comes to both Hezbollah and the war. Every sect has groups that sympathize with the organization and groups that are against Hezbollah and its involvement in a potential war with Israel. So let me start by providing an overview of the relationship between Hezbollah and two of the main communities in Lebanon, namely the Sunnis and the Christians, in addition to, if there is time, a discussion of Hezbollah's relationship with the Druze community. A determining characteristic of the relationship between Hezbollah and other sects is the near total control of the party over its own community. Dissenting Shia voices have almost disappeared since the assassination in February 2021 of the public intellectual and vocal Hezbollah critic Luqman Slim. So let's start with the Sunnis. They can be divided roughly into two camps, and the split seems to be along ideological lines. Islamist groups have begun to side with the organization in its support of Hamas and fight against Israel, while groups with a more secular outlook are urging caution and restraint. And it's important to note that there is distrust of Hezbollah among Sunni Islamists, especially after the short May 2008 conflict and Hezbollah's role in the Syria war. However, this does not mean that all Islamist groups are against the organization. Some have consistently allied with themselves with Hezbollah, including groups such as Harakat al-Tawheed and Jabhat al-Amal al-Islami. Other groups that originally were apprehensive of Hezbollah have in the past 9 months gotten closer to the organization. My colleague Joe Bahout mentioned that. One of these groups is the Lebanese branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, the so-called Jama'ah Islamiyah, which has joined the fight against Israel. Indeed, the Jama'ah's Fajr forces have been fighting in South Lebanon since late October 2023. And their participation has been largely symbolic and limited, but they have nevertheless lost 7 of their fighters, including 2 senior commanders. So it seems that a change of leadership led the Jama'ah to ally itself with a group it had a strained relationship with until 2022. No one group or politician represents the majority of the Lebanese Sunnis today. Nevertheless, statements by politicians such as Prime Minister Najib Mikati or former Prime Minister Fouad Sanyura are telling. For example, Sanyura, who had been in office during the 2006 summer war, has consistently urged the exercise of caution and avoiding serious problems and shocks, such as a war with Israel. He has also accused Hezbollah of taking Lebanon to the brink of the abyss. In the Lebanese Christian community, we also do not see a unified position vis-a-vis Hezbollah. The Christians are mainly divided among 3 political parties that have emerged from the civil war and the period of Syrian tutelage over Lebanon. The Kata'ib, the Lebanese forces, are on the anti-Hezbollah side, and the Free Patriotic Movement supports Hezbollah. 2 other Christian stakeholders should be mentioned here: the Maronite Patriarch Bashar al-Rai and the new Ashrafiyya Neighborhood Watch private militia named Jnud al-Rab, or God's Soldiers. In the past months, Samir Jaja and Sami Jmaye, leaders of the Lebanese forces and Kata'ib parties respectively, have accused Hezbollah of causing an unnecessary war of attrition and attracting Israeli attacks to Lebanon. Their comments suggest a reluctance to become involved in a regional conflict. Many Christian leaders oppose Hezbollah's actions against Israel, hoping to demonstrate that not all Lebanese people support the organization, potentially protecting their areas from the conflict's worst impact. Others also criticize Hezbollah's unilateral decision-making. It seems there's a shift away from Sunni-Shia tensions that we saw during the Syrian war, and Hezbollah's main opponents are now Christian factions. And while for over a decade, the Free Patriotic Movement provided Hezbollah and its weapons a cross-sectarian cover and allowed the party to avoid being tagged as sectarian, the relationship between the two has increasingly become frustrated, or what is called a frustrated partnership, at least since October 2022. The main reason for the chasm is the presidential ambition of the leader, Gibran Bassil, and Hezbollah's unwillingness to support him. In April 2024, Bassil affirmed that the Free Patriotic Movement supports the Muqawama, the resistance, but simultaneously, he rejected Hezbollah's position to participate in the Gaza war without what he called an internal national consensus. More recently, the Free Patriotic Movement has taken advantage of the specter of war to warn of state collapse if Lebanon's presidential vacancy persists, blaming certain parliamentary blocs for the stalemate. And in early July, to put pressure on Hezbollah, the Free Patriotic Movement criticized Lebanon's involvement in the Gaza conflict, despite or maybe because of this strained alliance with Hezbollah. The Maronite Patriarch Bashar al-Rai is another player Hezbollah must contend with. Since November 2023, he has been urging Lebanese officials to protect the country. He has issued regular statements against Hezbollah's involvement in the Gaza war. And last month, he seemed to imply that Hezbollah's activities in the south are terrorist, which has led to a boycott by the Shia religious leadership and by Hezbollah of the Patriarchate Summit that was organized during the June 2024 visit of the Vatican envoy. And the latest player on the Christian political religious scene is Jnud al-Rab, a right-wing extremist group which has emerged in 2019 claiming to represent and allegedly defend the inhabitants of the Beirut neighborhood of Ashrafiyya. The group has unofficial political and religious support, positioning themselves as the Christian counterpart to Hezbollah's self-security concept in Lebanon. And the group has contributed to sectarian tensions in Lebanon, and the growing polarization is largely attributed to Hezbollah's potential conflict with Israel. According to Jnud al-Rab, Hezbollah's actions not only threaten Lebanon's Christian neighborhoods, but also endanger the entire country. So, for example, in January 2024, they hijacked flight screens at the Beirut airport to declare their stance as Lebanon's defenders. They displayed a message warning Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah against engaging in a war with Israel. And they stated that the airport should be free from Hezbollah's influence and condemned the group's weapon transfers. This act further deepened the divide between Lebanon's Christians and Shia communities, culminating in the killing of a senior figure in the Lebanese forces in April 2024. Do I have time for the Druze, Ahmed?
Yeah, go ahead. Just 1 minute.
Okay. So until recently, one of the descendants of the historical leaders of the Druze community, Prince Talal Arslan, was a Hezbollah supporter. However, he lost his seat in parliament in the 2022 elections to one of the new Reform MPs. And this loss was due to Arslan's obliviousness to the fact that by aligning himself so openly with Hezbollah, he was alienating and antagonizing the Druze electorate in Mount Lebanon. So for the moment, at least, Arslan is out of the picture. In contrast, the other scion of traditional leaders, Walid Jumblat, the leading figure within the Progressive Socialist Party, has been notable as the weather vane of Lebanese politics. He has been slowly giving more responsibilities to his son and heir Taimur, who became a parliamentarian in 2018 and the leader of the party in May 2023. However, Walid Jumblat has remained an outspoken voice on the Lebanese political scene, calling in October on Hezbollah not to be dragged into the war, while doubting that Lebanon can escape strife. On X, he has called on members of the Druze community in Israel not to take part in the war. And more recently, he has expressed his horror after seeing images of his father, Kamal Jumblat, during the funeral of a Druze fighter who died in the Israeli attacks on Gaza. However, like many in Lebanon, he will side with Hezbollah should Israel attack the country, as he clearly articulated at the beginning of the conflict. And more recently, at the end of June 2024, he predicted an escalation of the conflict and maintained, and this is probably quite important, and we should address it in the Q&A, that the rules of engagement that have been in place since the end of the 2006 war have changed. So in conclusion, all the communities in Lebanon have been urging restraint and would prefer to see Hezbollah avoid a war with Israel. Overall, Hezbollah's actions have deepened sectarian divides and complicated Lebanon's internal politics, with the country's stability increasingly at risk amidst these tensions. Nevertheless, I would argue that internal struggle between the different Lebanese factions will be dealt with after a possible conflict with Israel. In the meantime, for all the Lebanese groups, the enemy of my enemy is also my enemy. They will all rally around Hezbollah should war break out, as was the case in 2006, and will return eventually to their intersectarian strife once the war ends. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Rola. Appreciate it. Paul?
Thank you, Ahmed, and thank you to the Arab Center. And it's great to be with my colleagues on this Zoom. I hope my connection from Lebanon remains steady. Well, I think the U.S. position has been fairly well known. The U.S. has had an envoy to this conflict, Amos Hochstein, that's had many trips to Lebanon and Israel. Some of my colleagues already talked about it. The Americans have been urging the Israelis not to escalate into a major war and have been urging Hezbollah and Iran, obviously, not to escalate into a major war as well. That was part of the narrative of the American President Biden on October 7, when he supported Israel and warned others not to escalate. The U.S. kind of understands, on the Israeli side of the position that they are trying to negotiate a withdrawal of elite Hezbollah fighters from the border region in southern Lebanon, which the Israelis say could launch a overnight sudden attack like Hamas did in the south. And hence they're trying to negotiate with Hezbollah new arrangements, new rules of the game, as it were, such that Hezbollah would withdraw from that border area. And at the same time, I'm not sure that you can hear me. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Ahmed? Yeah, okay.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, so that negotiation is ongoing. I think where we are today, Hezbollah has made it clear from the very beginning that its war on and in northern Israel is directly connected to the ongoing conflict in Gaza. And if Israel and Hamas reached a ceasefire in Gaza, then Hezbollah would be open to a ceasefire and possibly open to some arrangements in the south. Alongside that, it wants a demarcation of the Lebanese border and reclaiming some of the Lebanese territories that it claims are under occupation by Israel. So we are in a position where the two conflicts are obviously linked. I think where we are in early July, that I would say that there's more momentum in the talks than there was a month ago. My assessment is that we're getting closer to a cessation of hostilities in Gaza. That might be still weeks or months away. But I think that dynamic and that fact makes any decision to launch a full-scale war while that is winding down does not make a lot of sense. And I think that's well understood in Israel. And a lot of Israeli leaders have said it, that if they can get a ceasefire and return of hostages in Gaza, then Hezbollah would accept a ceasefire. And then, at least the Israelis would not be under direct attack in northern Israel. So I don't expect, from the Israeli side at least, a major war in the coming weeks or months. I think they are not prepared for it. The political mood is not prepared. They don't have the defenses for it. And they don't have a viable war plan that even if they launched a war, that it would be any more successful than 2006, which was not successful. And I've not read any analysis that would indicate that they have a plan to do something that would actually end in what they could consider a victory for them. So I don't expect a major conflict in this near term. But I do think, and it's quite obvious from Israeli leaders and military thinkers and so on, that the long-term situation between Israel and Hezbollah and Lebanon is something that they're increasingly very uncomfortable with. And I would expect, with the large-scale support they're getting from the United States, $14–15 billion, and the lessons they've learned in missile defense and drone defense from the conflict with Iran and others with Hezbollah, we are in an arms race. And I think if they can deploy enough anti-missile and anti-drone equipment, maybe through introducing new laser technology, if at any point late this year or in 2025, if they feel that they can defend themselves against a large-scale missile and drone attack from Hezbollah or Hezbollah and its allies, then at that point, I think a war would become much more realistic, much more possible from the Israeli side. On the American side, I mean, we've already said, I think their position is obvious. They absolutely do not want a large-scale war between Israel and Hezbollah. They obviously want the Gaza war to end. They want this off the headlines. They want this behind them. But we should be very clear that the US has really almost no influence on an Israeli decision of war and peace. The Israelis are well aware that if they went to war, whether it's with Hamas or with Hezbollah, the US Congress will stand with them, will provide support, as would the US military. Netanyahu knows it. Many other Israeli leaders know it. So even though the US is the superpower and people think that it calls the shots, I think it's been quite clear in the last 9–10 months that they have not called the shots. And I think the Israelis know very well that when they decide to go to war with Hezbollah, or if they decide to do that, the United States is committed, has no options other than to support it. That means, I think, continuing to provide financial support, military support, anti-missile, anti-drone support from, US forces and fleets in the region, even if they don't like it. But I still think the assessment of Amos Hochstein and other people that you see in this domain, their assessment is that they think a large-scale war is unlikely. They're not preparing for it. That's not what is largely on the agenda. I think they feel a bit of optimism that the talks seem to be approaching a de-escalation and maybe even a ceasefire point within the next month or two, and that should help resolve the urgent crisis on the Lebanese side. Obviously, we also have to take into account in the medium term the U.S. elections and who's going to be in charge in Washington. Obviously, the Israelis would prefer Trump over Biden or Trump over a Democrat. But either way, the U.S. would support them whenever and whatever they decide to launch a war, unfortunately. And that makes the situation all that more real and all that more dangerous. Finally, I'll throw into the mix, although it wasn't part of my question, that we just had an election in Iran. I'm not, it went slightly in maybe a direction slightly different than what might have been ideal for Hezbollah and sort of the more hardliners. The new president says he wants to negotiate with the Americans. He wants to reach out to the region. Obviously, he's not the supreme leader. He's not the IRGC. But I'm sure that Hezbollah is keeping an eye on politics in Iran, and as should everybody else, to see if this election makes any difference in Iran's trajectory with the international community or with the Arab countries or Turkey, and how that might affect calculations of war and peace, especially if there is a war. Iran would have to, back that war, like America automatically would back Israel. Iran would automatically back Hezbollah, but that would cost hundreds of millions of dollars at a time when the Iranian public and Iran doesn't have that much excess cash. So I think that factors into the mix as well. But I'll stop there for now, and over to you, Ahmed.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Paul. Thank you to all of you for your additional remarks. I appreciate them very much. They actually do frame the whole discussion rather well. Patricia, I'll just ask you a little question on just a little clarification. You said there is an ultra side of two sides, one totally refusing, one totally up supporting, but then the big middle. What, generally speaking, is the political big middle that is talking about we don't want war, and how do we define that big middle? Who are they?
Maybe she did not hear the question.
Oh, there you are.
No, sorry, I heard it. Yeah. I think, I mean, the big majority is in the middle. What I was trying to say is, on the one hand, you have sort of the base, Hezbollah's base, who are unequivocally supportive of Hezbollah. On the other, you have another camp that, is against it. And we know, I mean, my fellow panelists talked a little bit about those positions, including Rola and Joe, how the different factions have positioned themselves. But I think the majority would fall, the rest would fall in the middle, but they are moving in a direction of becoming supportive of Hezbollah, was I trying to say. So I would kind of lump the majority, except for the specific sort of the specific parties that Rola very eloquently sort of characterized in terms of their position, right? And their shifting positions, including the Sunnis.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Okay. Another question.
Ahmed, if I may, Ahmed, as you say, to encourage discussion and debate, I think we should, recall that and be clear. I believe, I don't know if my, panelists agree, but that Hezbollah's decisions on war and peace, yes, they take into account public opinion, no doubt, but they make their decisions on their strategic and political calculations, and not on, on October 8th, did they take a poll of their community? Yes, they want a war, let's go to war. Others think otherwise. Nor do they depend on public opinion. They control certainly public opinion in their community. They police it by force. They pay for it. They are making decisions, and they will continue to make decisions of war and peace based on their own calculations connected to the Revolutionary Guards in Iran and other dynamics. And the different Lebanese communities might like it or not like it, but and will have to live with the results either way, but have very little impact on what the decisions are made.
Yeah, true. I mean, Hamad Ra'ad, the parliamentary the leader of the parliamentary bloc, accused everybody that, oh, they want to go to the beach, they want to have parties and stuff like that. It's like he doesn't really care what other people do. You're right about that. Patricia, generally just touch on the economic situation today in Lebanon. Why is it simply a disaster for a war to happen?
Well, I mean, this is just to remind people, I mean, the economy has really taken a hit since October 7. Everyone is the feeling that you get is a wait and see with regards to what's happening and what's happening in Gaza and what the repercussions will be in Lebanon. Now, I mean, we all are familiar with sort of the impact of the economic collapse, the fact that you have extreme devaluation of the currency, highest sort of debt to GDP ratio in the world. And the infamous kind of data point that 80% of Lebanese now are poor, are pushed into poverty. Now, I think we need to keep in mind that the situation today is different than in 2006 because the country had a functioning financial system, banking sector that could rebound and also benefited from Arab external support, European support, which is unlikely to come in the same manner should there be a war. So the implications on Lebanon is in terms of sort of a cost of war, which will certainly be tremendous. Again, we sort of know the data points from 2016 are that you had some 100 roads and 70 bridges destroyed. The airport was out of commission. You had 1 million people, a million people displaced. So at some point, at the same time, you have this looming ahead and sort of the disastrous potential implications on the economy, but you have political status and inaction that continues. You have a caretaker government that's been running the country, and sort of ineffective or efforts made to fill the vacuum that have been sort of made no progress. And you have the IMF, which had put together and negotiated a rescue package of $3 billion in 2022, which would, I mean, we all know pending reforms that address corruption, the corruption that enabled the financial collapse in some ways, but instead the government, instead of functioning as a sort of well-intentioned government and securing this package, you have politicians that have been in the context, again, with war looming ahead, they've really sort of stalled embarking in any sort of reforms to restructure the banking sector, to improve governance, to introduce fiscal transparency, and instead have really been sort of trading blame, propagating disinformation to justify these delays. So on the one hand, while this sort of shows or indicates what the potentially catastrophic economic effects of war on Lebanon, and again, one that would come at a time that is untimely, to say the least, there's also sort of the sad reality that there's a normalization of the internal situation that is extremely dangerous and a resort to sort of bickering and politicking in a sort of usual way, while the next phase will only make things worse for living conditions and economically. So to say, again, it has become stale to say that something needs to be done urgently, given the absence of really genuine efforts to make steps in the direction of any sort of recovery, whether political or economic. So
right.
I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Right. Thanks. Joe, we have a new president in Iran, but generally speaking, we're talking about both in domestic and foreign policy. decisions are made by the Supreme Leader Khamenei. Where would a new president influence affect the issue of whether there is a war or not, and whether Iran goes this way or that way?
I think, I mean, Paul expanded a little bit on that, or at least he touched upon that. I think, I mean, I don't want to be very categoric, but I would say the president has almost 0.5% ability to affect Iran's decision on war and peace in the region. Now, of course, you can to take it in reverse. The fact that this president has been elected shows that probably the system in Iran and the popular opinion, but I agree with Paul, it's not very important, but the fact that he has been elected with a very smooth acceptance by, let's say, the radicals of the system, show that, in fact, they are looking for a certain room for respiration internally, mainly towards the society and probably towards the Western world, and thus the announcement that he would renegotiate a nuclear agreement, etc. By the way, that has been suspended by the US and not by Iran. So this is a useful reminder. So I don't think it will be very important, but it's a sign that, yes, priorities for Iranians now are mainly also to soothe, let's say, the relation between state and society, or the regime and society in Iran. But I don't think it will change anything in case Israel decides to trigger a huge war in Lebanon. This decision at that point, as Paul said, will be in the hands of the IRGC and the guide. Let me maybe tackle a few other things, if you allow me, Imad, on the economy, on things that Patricia have talked about. I think that for Hezbollah, there are two main reasons why the situation is absolutely making them decide that they don't want war. And this is a difference with 206. One is the state of the country, as you said, Patricia, and we all know it, we won't expand on it, but mainly this time, the state of Hezbollah's constituency. I mean, the collapse of Lebanon is taking a high toll on Hezbollah's constituency, which is, by all metrics, one of the most, let's say, disenfranchised in Lebanon. So they know that this time, having 300,000, 400,000 refugees from the south fleeing to Beirut, that would be unwelcome, by the way, in Beirut, taking care for them, and etc. This will be for them a disaster domestically in their own constituency. Second, and in relation to that, Hezbollah knows very well, and it has been a while that they say it for people who talk to them, that they are very worried of the level of division within the Lebanese society. That is unprecedented. Rola talked about it, Patricia talked about it, we alluded to it. We are now in almost two Lebanons, okay, at all levels. Now, here a caveat, and Paul said it, it doesn't mean much if you are pro or against, because you are powerless ultimately. But Hezbollah knows that this is a popular mood within which it's very difficult to wage a long-term war, okay, a sort of 82-like war. This is very catastrophic. And on top of that, something that we haven't mentioned, I fear to mention it because I don't want to be alarmist on that, but Hezbollah's calculus also is that in case a war is prolonged against them in Lebanon, and they have a massive population displacement, this would cause maybe potentially frictions, military frictions, security frictions, with some segments of the population residing in Lebanon, not only Lebanese, I mean Syrian refugees and etc., who for many have settled accounts to settle with Hezbollah, and they would maybe tempted to take advantage of that. I saw very alarming statements and tweets by some figures of the Syrian opposition. I think they are a little bit living on La La Land, but it's significant. They were asking, if Hezbollah is attacked by Israel, who would you support? And implicitly they were saying or meaning that they would support or at least wish for an Israeli victory against Hezbollah. This is something very important, very dangerous, and Hezbollah, I repeat it and I confirm it, knows it. Okay, and they are taking this very seriously. Now, as Paul said, and I say again, if this happens, Hezbollah will be fearless. will be restless. I mean, they will crush any dissent in the knot, in the womb. Okay. However, this will cause problems in Lebanon, and they know it. Now, here something else also. The two Lebanons that we are talking about, it's not only pro and against war and etc. Increasingly, and Patricia alluded to that with the crisis, the problem in Lebanon is that for many, and this is very, very sad and unfortunate, for many, and most of them are in the government today, the crisis is over. The crisis has resolved itself by itself at minimum, meaning that you have the majority of people that have been expelled from the system in Lebanon that are living with $300-400 remittances, etc. And the new class of people who are completely insensitive to the crisis, that are living completely on ways of life that you can't imagine, okay, with a lot of money being spent into country, new construction, restaurants opening, and etc. So this is also the division within Lebanon, and the ones who are spending and partying and etc. are not always the ones who are against Hezbollah. You understand what I mean? Some of this money is coming from a constituency that is very close to Hezbollah. So things are very complicated, very complex, and you have to navigate within all these let's say, constraints in the country. Now, to end on that and on the economic crisis, what is sure is that, Patricia, the crisis has not been compounded only by October 7, but by the lack of any decision on that front. The problem is that as long as we are in this situation, meaning the incapacity to elect a president of the republic, to form a new government, to make public administration function at a minimum level, the hemorrhage in the country will continue. People will continue to be despaired. Some people will make their own living in their own bubble and their own system, but increasingly people are thinking about maybe find an alternative to living in Lebanon. By the way, last word, some people in Israel are starting to think also this way, and this is something I think regionally we should take into account. I think the Israeli society also is very strained, and a lot of quote-unquote liberal elites in the society, in the Israeli society, are today openly questioning, let's say, their future in such an Israel, not only because of the war, but because of the drift towards the right and religious extremism and etc.
Thank you, Joe. Rola, I have a little question for you. Basically, the idea of the Lebanese forces, the Kataib and the Junud al-Rab, how far will they go in opposing Hezbollah?
Yeah, I think they would not mind a fight, but the problem is they're probably not equipped. They don't have the weapons, they don't have the training that Hezbollah has. Let's not forget that Hezbollah was forged in the war recently. I mean, its fighters, they were forged in the war in Syria. They had to fight hard there, and they are better trained and better equipped. So I would expect some of these Christian groups to engage with Hezbollah if they could, but they will be faced with the same losses that the Sunni forces in 2008 faced when they fought Hezbollah in the brief 48-hour conflict in Beirut.
The other one I wanted to ask you about is Walid Jumblat. I mean, you called him the weather vane of Lebanese politics, and you're so right about that. He is reminding everyone of the rules of engagement for a war in the south, or the skirmishes. Israel has actually struck places that are way out of those rules of engagement agreed to in 2006. How far can the rules of engagement really be adhered to, if they are adhered to, or if Walid Jumblat's wish to adhere to them is to be respected?
I think he has made it clear that they have already been thrown aside, that the rules of engagement are not being respected anymore. And what he's basically talking about is proportionality. And I think we are outside that frame now. So I think he would like us to, or he would like to see Both parties follow the rules of engagement and not especially attack civilians. But if there is a war, I think we will see a disproportional attack from the Israelis on Lebanon. I mean, they've made it clear in the statements by the different political and military leaders. They are bringing back the Dahya doctrine of total annihilation. They've discussed bringing back Lebanon to the Stone Age. So this kind of discourse does obviously not play well with the Lebanese or with Hezbollah. And so if Israel engages in such, a disproportionate attack on Lebanon, I think Hezbollah has made it clear that they would answer the same way, basically.
In kind, yeah.
In kind, yes.
Yeah, because the issue of Hezbollah has not been what's the word, cowed into not responding in kind, and they Hassan Nasrallah has threatened that he will go to بعد Haifa.
Exactly. I mean, the videos that we saw from the drones have made it clear to everyone that Hezbollah has capacities we were not aware of before, and that they have important, sensitive information on military installations in Israel and other kinds of installations, including airports, ports, but also maybe nuclear installations. I mean, the videos have made that clear, and they made it clear that they will attack these installations should Israel attack the Lebanese infrastructure, as they did in 2006. I mean, that was kind of the rationale that Israel followed in 2006, destroying the Lebanese infrastructure. If I'm not mistaken, it was over $1 billion of damages after the 33-day war in 2006. And so basically, Hezbollah is saying, if you do that to us, we will respond in kind as much as they can. Of course, we're talking about a state supported by the superpower versus non-state actors. So there is already a disproportion in power there. On one side, a nuclear state, on the other, a non-state actor. But of course, it is the most powerful non-state actor, arguably, in the world.
Well, come to think of it, watching Israel operate in Gaza the way it's operating, I think it's not far-fetched that they would do the same thing in Dahya or anywhere else in Lebanon.
Exactly.
Paul, I'm interested in you elaborating a little bit on Hochstein's mission and whether he is truly negotiating a Lebanese-Israeli border agreement.
Well, if I may, Ahmed, let me just comment on one thing. We haven't mentioned the Lebanese army. And as we're mentioning all the different groups and some of the smaller militias, it's important to note that the Lebanese, there are two major military forces in Lebanon, Hezbollah, which has very effective anti-Israeli capacities and so on, and the Lebanese army, which is a major force in terms of internal security. Right. And that's really the security reality of Lebanon. So while there are many groups and some have a bit of arms and some want to make a problem here and there, if it's not Hezbollah, the rest largely probably can continue to be managed and controlled by the army. The army, of course, is under strain. We all know that because of the economy and so on, but it also enjoys strong support from the US, from the West, from Arab countries. It's not left alone. So we need to keep that in mind. Also, a quick comment maybe on Rula's description of the balance of power, which is absolutely true. You have Israel, a state backed by a superpower, and it is a nuclear power. And on the other hand, you have Hezbollah. But I would not describe Hezbollah fully as a non-state actor. It is effectively very, very integrated with the Iranian military superstructure, and they're proud of it. They have all of their weapons, all of their intelligence capacities, all of their coordination. So like you have in NGOs, GNGOs, GINGOs, your government, non-government organizations, Hezbollah is a non-governmental organization, but also part of the Iranian military infrastructure, and that's what makes it very effective. And I think that's that's fairly clear. Your question was about the negotiations that Hochstein is negotiating. I think he's been, it's been in the press. He's been very clear about it. He just gave an interview a couple of days ago to a colleague, I think it was at the Carnegie Endowment, Aaron Miller, so you can go and listen to that. Yes, what he's negotiating is both the arrangements in terms of withdrawal of Hezbollah elite fighters from a certain distance, 6 kilometers, 8 kilometers, they go back and forth. It's not exactly the Litani River, because the Litani River goes up and down, but there's some distance there, and what those arrangements would be. And at the same time, he is negotiating the border points between Israel and Lebanon. Israel has indicated to Amos Hochstein that they are willing to make progress and to commit to concessions on the border, the land border issues, if they get what they want on some of those withdrawals. So he feels that there is a possibility there. He thinks they've made progress on a number of details on those issues. And he is very clear that he needs a ceasefire in Gaza in order to really clinch a deal on the Israeli-Hezbollah side. I think it's been indicated in this panel, and it's come under criticism, and this is a big difference with 2006, is in 2006 it was the Lebanese government and the Lebanese prime minister that was negotiating with the international community and in the UN and 1701. And in a way, the war enabled the Lebanese state, at least diplomatically and politically, to play a role and to come out of it with a presence, with a legitimacy. At this point, there is no president, there is no functioning government, so part of the blame lays on the Lebanese side. But I would, maybe also lay some blame that I think the Americans, the French, the Germans are going too far in blithely ignoring the Lebanese state and the Lebanese government and talking only to Hezbollah. At the end of the day, any sustainable agreement will require a buy-in from the Lebanese people, the Lebanese parliament, Lebanese government. It needs that official stamp. It needs that, sustainability. So I would, issue a call, as it were, to, as much as possible, put the Lebanese government and the Lebanese state as much active, as much front and center as possible. Another interesting thing, and it was slightly, hinted at in the panel today, one thing Amos Hochstein is saying is that if there is a ceasefire, because there's already been a lot of damage, obviously, on the Lebanese side, there's been damage on the Israeli side, but he's talking on the Lebanese side, that he wants the US and the Western community to provide the money for reconstruction. He doesn't want a repeat of 2006. That's what it's the American position you asked about. He doesn't want Iran or Iran and somebody else to come in and give Hezbollah the money, and so Hezbollah makes a political win out of it. He's, saying that America and the West will do it. Now, will he be able to do that politically in Congress in the US? That's a different discussion. But that is what he is saying, and what he is putting on the table. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. The idea of trying to the Americans, the French, and the Germans are talking directly to Hezbollah through Nabih Berri. So maybe that's the fig leaf, so to speak. He's the Speaker of Parliament, so he represents the Lebanese state. But you're right. Point well taken about involving the Lebanese state in this. And 2006, it was Senora who was negotiating, and but I guess Hezbollah will take the political win as well as it comes. Okay, we do have some.
May I, Ahmad?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, very quickly. Completely on that point. First, as I said, the Germans are directly talking to Hezbollah. I mean, the Bund, the director of the Bund, the German intelligence service, was in Beirut last week, and he met with Hezbollah 3 or 4 times. And this was very nicely and smartly leaked by Hezbollah. By the way, to say that even the country that is most hostile, because Germany took very hostile positions in the Gaza war, is talking to us. So it was a way of bragging about it. But I completely agree with Paul that the state of Lebanon should be kept in the loop. But just a very quick word on, I mean, prolonging what Paul is saying. And this is why also I think that the war is not in sight, at least for now, maybe next year. The Israelis are very well aware also that what Hochstein is putting on the table, if the Israeli aim is what they say, meaning a sort of security zone, of buffer zone, 7-10 kilometers, plus minimal security arrangements, plus, etc., 1701 plus. If this is the goal, this package is reachable through the Hochstein agreement. So in the Israeli head, cost-benefit analysis, it's much easier to apply and to reach what you want through this way than to try to reach it through a way, meaning war, that could completely topple the table and put you in a complete different, let's say, landscape. So this is why also the cool-headed people in Israel, and there are even Netanyahu, I mean, behind his rhetorics and vociferation and etc., they know that cost-benefit analysis, it's much better to try to reach what you want through the Hochstein agreement. The problem is, and this is the thing that we have forgot to mention, is that Hezbollah, because of the rhetoric of unity of France, is still very strongly linking any progress on the Lebanese issue to a ceasefire, a real ceasefire, durable ceasefire in Gaza. What we know, and Paul may correct me, what we know is that the deal with Lebanon is almost done. The envelope is already done. I mean, we know 90% of it is already agreed upon. The problem is the moment. The problem is how you apply it. The problem is you can't apply it unless there is a durable ceasefire in Gaza. And this is the knot of the issue.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, this is why they're watching what happens in Gaza and whether the latest, at least the latest one that was declared, announced yesterday, I think, a 6-week ceasefire with some hostages released in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. Yeah, Hezbollah is waiting for any deal. Yeah, Patricia, go ahead. Say.
Can I provide a quick perspective?
Yeah.
On this issue?
Please.
I think one way to look at it, and I don't know, it may align, it may not align with what people have been saying, is the issue, the reality that when war ends in Gaza, this could all stop. But in some ways, I think, and I don't know if Joe, we disagree, I think Israel at this point may not want it to. I think because when the war ends in Gaza, this means that Israel would have made concessions, if not conceded some defeat. So it would not have sort of achieved its aims of getting rid of Hamas after 9 months. But then at the same time, the moment that war ends in Gaza, Hezbollah will stop attacking and will declare victory. So in some ways, like the war ending in Gaza will mean a double defeat for Israel, because it would have been unable to defeat Hamas and then unable to defeat Hezbollah, which would have actually initiated and ended the conflict with Israel. And so even if Israel is implicitly inclined to concede some defeat at this point, let's assume, to Hamas, it may not be so inclined to do that with regards to Hezbollah. And without using first the sort of formula it used in Gaza to compensate for the fact that it isn't winning, which is use excessive force to reassure the public that force is being applied. So the same formula in some ways is likely, in my opinion, to be applied to Lebanon, which would lead to destruction of parts of Lebanon, but not necessarily Hezbollah's defeat, as an Israeli attempt at a quasi-non-defeat in some ways. But I do want to, in this regard, I just do want to say one thing that I think goes back to what Paul said, which is, I think while in Gaza, the US has actively sort of empowered, we can say, or supported Israel, it may be reluctant to do the same in Lebanon. I think this is what Paul said at some point, despite public pronouncements, that it will support Israel unconditionally. so I think it's important to keep in mind whether it's realistic that something is done. I think the U.S. doesn't really want a Lebanon-Israel war, and it's realistically the only actor with the upper hand that could. I don't know if you agree with me, Paul, on the ability of the U.S. to convince Israel not to engage in war, but
Basically,
I think in this case the interest. Yeah, sorry,
Yes.
Ayman.
I'm sorry. Basically, apply some brakes on Israeli wishes here. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a lot of complicated issues. Some of them really actually segue into this first question from our audience. This is from Scott Seaman. Basically, anyone can take a crack at this question. How willing is the Israeli government, the current Israeli government? How willing is it to sustain significant civilian casualties inside Israel due to a war with Hezbollah? In other words, I mean, can Israel really agree that Hezbollah can still inflict a lot of damage on Israel? Paul,
well, I'll jump in. Yeah, I mean, because I did mention it a little bit in the beginning. Yeah. I mean, it's been 9 months, maybe 10 months. From the very beginning, there have been voices in the Israeli military who've said they should go after Hezbollah and so on. But every time they think it through, a number of things, as Joe said, in the cost benefit. First of all, it's very clear that Hezbollah can inflict very heavy damage on their infrastructure, on the civilian areas and civilian populations. They could lose tens of thousands of deaths, certainly thousands, but possibly tens of thousands. They know that currently they don't have enough anti-missile or anti-drone capacity to defend themselves against Hezbollah's missile capacity. They're also aware that there isn't a war plan which leads to victory. I mean, if they couldn't defeat Hamas in a zone that's completely besieged and isolated with no strategic depths whatsoever, and Hamas is 10 times weaker, then certainly they cannot defeat Hezbollah, which has infinite strategic depth, which has far more firepower and all of the rest. So it's still the case that Israel would like to go to war with Hezbollah, but Israel, when it thinks about the cost benefit and the planning and so on, realizes that still, currently, until they have new weapon systems, it is not a war that makes sense for them or that they can win. And I'll repeat what I said earlier, that the U.S. Israel takes U.S. positions somewhat into account, but U.S. has no decisive voice if Israel wants to launch, if it really feels it wants to and it has to. The U.S. cannot dissuade it from that. That's been proven many times in the past. And Israel knows that the U.S. Congress and the U.S. in general would end up, like Iran will support Hezbollah, the U.S. will support Israel if it's already in a war. So all that to say that I don't expect a war now, but if the military capacities of Israel evolve dramatically and Hezbollah loses some of its missile and drone capacity in 2025 or 2026, then we might be in a different situation.
Thanks, Paul. This question reminds me of, unfortunately, 2006, 1982 Israeli invasion, where some people in the south of Lebanon basically were celebrating the Israeli invasion because it supposedly rid the southern Lebanese from the so-called Palestinian occupation of the South at the time. I'm old to remember that. You probably, the panelists, are not. Anyway, this is a question about, are there groups, this is the question I'm going to direct to Rola. Are there groups in Lebanon that would welcome an Israeli invasion of Lebanon?
No, I don't think that any groups in Lebanon would welcome an Israeli invasion of Lebanon. They've learned the lessons after 1982. I mean, in 82, Bashir Gemayel and the Lebanese forces were enthusiastic, hoping to instrumentalize, I would argue, the Israeli invasion to help bring Bashir Gemayel to power, but also thinking they could negotiate with Israel, and that proved to be in vain, I think. So the learned lessons after 1982 is no, you don't welcome such an invasion. But also, I think the war in Iraq have taught the people in the region that you should not hope for help to come from outside because the price is too high. It will be a total destruction of the infrastructure, and Hezbollah is not going to disappear. If Hamas is an idea and cannot be killed, as has been argued in the past 9 months, that I would argue the same applies to Hezbollah. So I doubt that there would be any serious groups, at least, that would welcome an Israeli invasion. But I think Joe wants to add something.
Yeah, Joe.
No, I wanted to, in fact, actually, I raised my hand before, but on that level, I mean, I would like to agree with you. I mean, I very much like to agree with you, but I'm a bit more skeptical living lately in Lebanon. Not sure that everybody is sharing the same wisdom that you share. Probably they don't voice it very much, but yes, okay, let's not expand on that. To get back to the question of casualties in Israel that Paul tackled and prolong what Patricia was saying, first of all, we don't know much about the casualties in Israel that are caused by Hezbollah. And this is something very interesting. There's a lot of, let's say, lid put on that by the Israeli military information that in times of war is something completely legal. Second, and this is a way to maybe slightly disagree with you, Patricia, but I mean, when you look at the north of Israel today, I mean, okay, we are in Lebanon, we are appalled by the destruction in the south, the displacement of people, etc. The north of Israel today is in ruin. It's in shambles completely. For 10 kilometers after the border, you don't have one soul. The villages are empty. They are obscure at night. There's no electricity. Land has been burned by Hezbollah rockets and etc. This is only probably 5% of what could happen in case of a full-fledged war. So yes, of course, the rage and the sense of, let's say, the urgency to take vengeance from Israel would operate, but very quickly it will translate in commensurate losses on the Israeli side that would compound Netanyahu or anyone in Israel's problem. I mean, if they think that they can compensate for the Gaza fiasco in Lebanon, this will be really a recipe for political catastrophe within Israel. So I think they know it, okay? They know, and as Rula said, I mean, the Hudhud overflight over Haifa, over the Golan, over etc., is for me a very strong deterrent message by Hezbollah saying, look, we don't want to go to war, but if we are forced to do it, this is what you will see. Lebanon is not anymore a punching ball that will take blows like Gaza or etc. Lebanon will be bulldozed. I don't have any illusion. I mean, yes, I don't think that things will be, but Hezbollah will inflict heavy damage, and Paul said it, on Israel. And this is something I think that Netanyahu is calculating very, very carefully. Third, when you look at the sociology of the people that has been displaced from the north of Israel, mainly this is agricultural people living out of the land. It's been now almost 1 year that they don't have access to their lands. Economically, this is a disaster for them. So if they want to have a chance of resuming a normal activity in the coming year or two, they have to come back in the coming months to their villages that are more or less intact with a land that is cultivatable. If we go to war, this problem will probably be, let's say, long for 3-4 years for Israel to reconstruct. So all these are elements of the deterrence equation between Lebanon and Israel again.
I wanted to comment just a bit, Ahmed, on the 82 sort of example. I mean, there were, I would say, two groups in 82 that, maybe thought they would benefit from that. Obviously, one group that Rula mentioned, and then, Bashir Ismail and all of that, he was killed. That whole plan didn't work out. And then there were others in the south. The PLO really ran much of the south and much of Beirut, and the majority in the south is not Christians and Bashir Ismail and so on. And at the end of the day, the result of the 82 invasion was the defeat and the departure of the PLO from Lebanon. And that, enabled the rise of Hezbollah. And then there was wars between Hezbollah and Amal to control the south and all of that. And Hezbollah now has established itself. So there were several potential beneficiaries there. But the main difference with 82, a coming war would be more like 2006, not like 1982, in the sense that in 1982, PLO was defeated and left Lebanon. In 2006, Hezbollah came out victorious and came out much stronger. And even the Lebanese who don't like Hezbollah or would want it to be disbanded or to go away, they don't want a war even on Hezbollah because it will come out stronger. It's a different result calculus. Thanks. I know we're running out of time, so I will.
Thank you. No, it's okay. This is an interesting question from Syrian Necht. It has to do with the grassroots activism on the ground. How is the civil society visible in the current situation, and which crucial role does their role play on both national and international levels? I guess the civil society in Lebanon are there preparations by the civil society for anything like this? Anyone can answer that question.
Joe?
I do not know. I don't know if anybody else knows. I just got here a week ago, so I can't comment.
No, I mean, very, very quickly, without being too harsh on what civil society is in Lebanon, I think that, I mean, civil society, first of all, remains to be defined in Lebanon and elsewhere. But if in Lebanon, the metrics or the benchmark of civil society's activism and activity is a post-2019 revolution and etc., I think the bar is really very, very low. I don't want to be harsher than that.
Yeah, thank you. Somebody is asking about Beirut Airport at this point. Where would Israel hit? I mean, would Israel really attack Lebanese infrastructure as in airport or seaport or anything like that? Or would Israel be more likely to attack only Hezbollah? I know we discussed that Israelis are willing to return Lebanon to the Stone Age, but what would be the priority for Israeli military?
If I may, I mean, I think the calculation, and I don't know exactly what their war plans are, but I would differentiate. I think there probably is an extensive Israeli war plan which is heavily targeted against Hezbollah and Hezbollah's communities. And there's a different war plan that might also target airports, ports, and so on. But in this war, they are very well aware that if they hit Beirut Airport, Hezbollah will close Tel Aviv Airport. So they would have to be willing. They didn't have to worry about that in 2006. Now they have to say, well, if we're going to put up with closing our own airport, we'll go after theirs. All that to say that I think the first place they would go in a major war is go all out against Hezbollah. Hezbollah, it could be Dahi, areas that are more specific. But even there, they would have to expect anything as retaliation from Hezbollah, including Hezbollah could escalate and hit their airport and their ports and so on. So that's my view. I do apologize, Ahmed. I have to run to another appointment. So my apologies. But thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. Thank you. We only have a couple more minutes. That's it. Thank you.
See you soon, Paul.
Yeah, I'm going to ask one question from Rita Sfire. Most of the statistics show that Hezbollah has already lost about 50% of its military leadership to targeted attacks. How does this affect the party's capabilities?
I'm happy to take that one.
Please, go ahead.
I think historically, if we look at the history of the organization, we see that their leadership have been assassinated, and we've always had someone step in. And lead the organization and make it even stronger. So I don't think that's an issue. They are prepared for that. They plan for it. That's the one difference I would argue between Hezbollah and some of the other groups in Lebanon. It's much more institutionalized. It does not rely as much on personality. Of course, the personality of Hassan Nasrallah is very important, but if he were to be killed tomorrow, I think someone else is in the wings ready to step in and take over the organization. He might not have the same impact at the beginning, but after a few years, he will find his footing, and I assume it's a he will find his footing and be able to continue leading the organization. So I personally don't see these attacks as doing anything to Hezbollah. The same thing I would argue also applies to Hamas. Historically, Israel has been killing the leadership of Hamas, but that has not affected the organization itself.
That is correct. That's that's my my take on it as well. I think that that is the end of our time for today. Sorry for all those people who sent questions to the panelists. We appreciate it. Thank you very much. I thank the panelists for appearing today with us, and thank you for your really very good insights and ideas. Thank you for everybody who watched this program, and please stay with us and keep watching, keep following Arab Center Washington DC events and productions. Thank you very much, and have a very nice day.
Thank you very much, Ahmad, and thank you all. It was nice seeing you.
Thank you, Ahmad.